Hi everyone, this is Josh Kolp, and we're learning Daf Lammed Aleph from Masechet Gittin, and I'm going to talk about the Mishnah again, which I believe I did last week as well. The Mishnah talks about again an easy way to make separating truma and tithes more possible. What a person would do is, let's say, set aside a large jug of wine. And then when he's consuming other wine, he would basically continue to count that wine as his truma and his maser. So for instance, let's say he's got a jug that holds, 10 gallons of wine, and now he can consume somewhere in the range of 100 gallons of other wine and count that wine that he set aside as truma and maser. It's going to depend on whether it's truma or maser. These are rough estimates. The problem is the wine that he set aside cannot have turned into vinegar, and in the ancient world before pasteurization, there was a greater danger of wine turning into vinegar. So the question is, in reference at least to wine, is what happens if he discovers that the wine has gone bad? How much of the wine that he already drank does he have to consider as if it wasn't tithed? So Rabbi Elazar says that he's concerned from period to period. I'm not going to talk about that. I want to talk about Rabbi Yehuda, who says there are 3 times a year when we check the wine. Bekidum shel motzei hachag, which most people interpret as the warm wind that goes out after Sukkot. Behotzaat smadar, when the grapes begin the very, very beginning of their budding. Ubishat knisat mayim baboser, and when the water goes into those freshly budding grapes once they begin to form. I'm not going to get into the exact what smadar and boser are, but they are stages in the development of the grapes. Now, what's interesting here is a couple of things. First of all, it's not all that clear that Rabbi Yehuda is referring to anything in our Mishnah. It could just be that this is the custom when they check wine, because winemakers are always going to want to check it to make sure that it's not turning into vinegar, because as soon as it begins to start to get a little sour, they're going to want to sell it or consume it as soon as possible. So it could be that Rabbi Yehuda is just talking about the custom, and that the editor of the Mishnah brought Rabbi Yehuda's words in here to be a part of our Mishnah because they could have ramifications for when we're concerned that his wine has gone bad. The other thing that I think is very interesting is, when are these time periods? So the warm winds that come after Chag HaSukkot, Chag is Sukkot, are going to be sometime shortly after Sukkot. So we're talking early fall. Wine, it comes to full in the land of Israel. Grapes are ready to be harvested in the fall, slightly before Sukkot, maybe in the late summer as well. But so when are they producing wine is what I'm curious at here. Wine, let's say grapes are harvested in the late summer. They're going to be turned immediately into wine. And so the first time you would check would be very close thereafter, right at the end of Sukkot, right after Sukkot. But then it's going to take a long time before they begin to bud, and before they get even closer, it's going to take an even longer time, which sounds like, according to this Mishnah, wine would last relatively long amount of time in the land of Israel. And what's interesting is when we compare that to the reality in Europe, the wine in the land of Israel and the Middle East lasted much longer because of the way it was stored. In the land of Israel, wine is stored in clay earthenware containers, and earthenware containers are fully sealed. As long as you seal the top and you have it all the way full, there's going to be very little air that's going to come into the jug. Now, when you open up to check it, you will let a little air in there, but that's a minimal amount of air, and they also had ways to make sure to limit that. In contrast, and therefore the wine might last a long time, and you can feel in this Mishnah that wine might have lasted all the way to the next season, at least potentially, which is a good thing. If you're living in the land of Israel, you'll have wine, good wine for the whole year. And aged wine might actually be better than new wine as long as it hasn't oxidized. However, wine in Europe was preserved in wooden barrels. Wooden barrels were made kind of primitively in the Middle Ages. They didn't develop better barrel making. Earthenware wouldn't have worked because it was so rainy there, and they just didn't use earthenware in Europe. And wooden barrels had a lot of holes in them, and we know from many other texts that wine would go bad very quickly, and by the time you got to Pesach, it would be grave danger that there wouldn't be much wine left. People were often left drinking wine that we today wouldn't drink because we would call it vinegar. Now, I should admit I am not an expert in the history of wine, but I still think it's very interesting to reflect on the different material cultures in the land of Israel versus Europe, where most of these texts were studied throughout the centuries.